In Victorian England, when a family faced death, there was only one way to keep the memory of a loved one alive: a final photograph. Yet some images hold secrets that go beyond death itself. This is the story of a photograph meant to be a last farewell, but which became proof of one of the most unsettling mysteries in Victorian medicine. The photograph was taken on November 15, 1858, just a day after the sudden death of Herbert Prescott, a boy of only 16. In the image, George Prescott, 9 years old at the time, sits solemnly beside his older brother, who lies still in a Victorian armchair, appearing peaceful. It seems a tender farewell, yet hidden beneath that calm scene was a terrifying truth discovered decades later. Herbert Prescott was more than just George's brother. At 16, he had taken on responsibilities far beyond his years, acting as a father figure to George after their father died tragically in a carriage accident 3 years prior. Their mother, Victoria Prescott, a woman with a delicate temperament, had never recovered from the loss and often withdrew for long periods, leaving Herbert to oversee the family's well-being. Despite his young age, Herbert worked as an accounting apprentice at a reputable firm in central London, a position he earned because of his intelligence and maturity. Neighbors remembered him as a healthy, determined young man, never showing signs of serious illness. On the morning of November 14th, Herbert appeared well. He had breakfast, spoke briefly with George about preparations for the coming winter, and then retired to his room, mentioning he felt slightly tired. George, absorbed in his lessons, thought little of his brother's behavior. For a boy who had lost his father so young and lived with a grieving mother, Herbert's presence was the anchor of his life. It wasn't until nightfall, when Herbert didn't come for dinner, that George went upstairs to check on him. What he found would haunt him forever. Herbert lay in bed, motionless, a serene expression on his face, as if he had simply drifted off to sleep and would never wake. Dr. Frederick Hastings, the local doctor, was called immediately. Trained at the University of Edinburgh and familiar with the Prescott family's medical history, Hastings examined Herbert thoroughly. His conclusion was shocking and baffling. Herbert Prescott was dead, but there were no clear signs of cause. His heart had stopped, yet there were no traces of heart disease, poisoning, injury, or physical trauma. His body had cooled naturally, and rigor mortis was setting in as expected. For all intents, Herbert had died what Victorian doctors called a natural death, a phrase often masking the limits of medical knowledge at the time. Dr. Hastings noted on the death certificate, "Sudden death by indeterminate natural cause. Vital signs absent. Burial recommended within 48 hours according to sanitary guidelines." In Victorian England, it was customary to photograph the dead, especially young family members. These post-mortem photographs, called memento mori, served as the family's only lasting image of the deceased. Victoria Prescott, overwhelmed by grief, was unable to make arrangements for Herbert's final portrait. James Morland, a trusted family friend and well-known photographer, offered to create the photograph. Morland, respected for his ability to capture dignity and serenity in post-mortem portraits, arrived the next morning with his equipment and glass plates necessary for the lengthy photographic process of the time. Herbert was positioned in his favorite armchair, dressed in his best suit, with an expression Morland carefully arranged to appear calm and composed. George was seated beside him, one hand on Herbert's shoulder, creating an image that conveyed both sorrow and acceptance. No one at the time could have imagined that this photograph would later serve as crucial evidence in a medical mystery nearly 60 years in the making. During the session, Morland noted something unusual. In his personal notes, later discovered in his studio, he wrote, "The deceased subject displayed a slightly rosier facial tone than expected. I assumed it was due to good circulation prior to death and the short time since passing." Herbert was buried at the local cemetery on November 16, 1858, just 2 days after his sudden death. The funeral was modest but respectful, attended by neighbors and colleagues. George, still in shock, stayed by the grave until the oak coffin was completely covered. The following years were difficult. Victoria, devastated by the loss, retreated further into silence. George grew up under her intermittent care and the support of compassionate neighbors. Morland remained a consistent presence, often checking on the family and providing assistance. Herbert's photograph became their most treasured possession, framed in the living room as a silent reminder of lost stability. George grew up, married Sarah Cavanaugh, and had children, eventually becoming a respected merchant. Herbert's image remained on display, a constant reminder of a brother lost too soon. When George died in 1923 at 74, his children inherited not only his possessions, but also the stories he had preserved, including the strange circumstances surrounding Herbert's death and the final photograph. It wasn't until 1919, during renovations of the local cemetery to accommodate soldiers fallen in World War I, that Herbert Prescott's mystery began to reveal itself. Dr. Horace Fairchild, a pioneering forensic pathologist trained in the latest methods in France, was hired to oversee the exhumation of several bodies. Among them was Herbert Prescott, buried for over 60 years. What Dr. Fairchild found inside the coffin shocked him and changed the understanding of the case. The oak coffin, remarkably preserved due to the quality of the wood and soil conditions, showed evidence that turned an apparently natural death into one of the most disturbing cases in medical history. His official report, now preserved in the archives of the Royal Institute of Medicine in London, detailed the horrors inside. The coffin lid had deep scratches, clearly made by human nails. The skeleton's position had changed significantly. Herbert, once buried on his back with arms crossed over his chest according to tradition, was now found in a posture suggesting a desperate struggle. His arms were raised toward the coffin lid, and fragments of his clothing were scattered as if he had fought to escape. Analysis revealed fractures in the finger bones consistent with prolonged digging against a hard surface, with small wood fragments embedded under the nails. The skull's condition, too, defied expectation for a natural death followed by immediate burial. He showed signs of internal trauma that could only have happened after burial. Extremely high blood pressure, possibly caused by panic and despair, resulted in small fractures at the base of the skull. Dr. Fairchild concluded in his report, "The evidence is clear. Herbert Prescott was not dead when buried. He experienced a state of suspended animation that was mistaken for death by the medical standards of 1858. The subject regained consciousness inside the coffin and struggled desperately for freedom before succumbing to asphyxiation and exhaustion." This discovery cast a new light on the photograph taken by James Mand. Modern experts in historical photography, when asked to examine the image, noticed details previously overlooked. The slightly rosier facial color Mand observed was in fact evidence of active blood circulation. Even more chilling, a careful digital analysis of Herbert's eyes revealed the eyelids were not completely closed, and subtle facial muscle tension, inconsistent with true death, was visible. Victorian medicine, although advanced for its time, lacked the diagnostic tools to distinguish between actual death and deep comas or states like catalepsy. Dr. Hastings, a competent physician by 1858 standards, followed all available medical protocols, but simply didn't have the knowledge or instruments to detect extremely weak vital signs. The condition Herbert probably experienced, known today as catalepsy, is a rare neurological state characterized by muscular rigidity and apparent absence of detectable vital signs. During such episodes, breathing can become shallow and the pulse so weak it's nearly impossible to detect without modern equipment. Dr. Joseph Carraway, a modern forensic historian, explained that catalepsy was often mistaken for death. In the pre-modern era, these symptoms could last hours or even days, leaving a patient conscious but unable to move or communicate. Herbert Prescott was likely aware of everything from the misdiagnosis to his burial. The implications of this case went far beyond Herbert alone. Research into medical and cemetery records of the time suggests similar incidents may have been more common than realized. Victorian practices of rapid burial, motivated by sanitation concerns, unintentionally created situations where diagnostic errors could be deadly. The Herbert Prescott case became a landmark in forensic literature, studied in medical universities as an example of historical limits in diagnosis and the importance of confirmatory methods. George Prescott, who died never knowing the truth about his brother, had preserved documents from that tragic November day. Among them was a diary where he reflected on Herbert's sudden death. In a disturbing entry dated 2 years later, George wrote, "Sometimes I wake at night thinking of Herbert. I have strange dreams where he calls to me as if trying to tell me something important. Mother says it's just imagination, but I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right that day." Mr. Mand also seemed uneasy when visiting the grave, as if sensing something unspoken. This intuition, recorded decades before forensic evidence surfaced, shows even a child noticed something troubling about Herbert's death that he couldn't articulate. The photograph of the Prescott brothers became one of the most studied historical documents of the Victorian period, valued not only as art, but as inadvertent evidence of premature burial. Medical museums now display reproductions alongside forensic findings, teaching the evolution of medical knowledge and precise diagnostic methods. James Mann's detailed notes about the session survived, documenting both technical aspects of photography and personal impressions. In a letter to a colleague, he wrote, "There was something unsettling about that session. Young George seemed nervous beyond normal grief, looking at his brother as if expecting him to move. At the time, I thought it was just the behavior of a grieving child, but now I wonder if he perceived something adults missed." Photographic techniques of 1858 required long exposures, often several minutes. Mann observed George closely, noting he murmured quietly, almost conversing with his supposedly dead brother. At the time, these were recorded as curiosities. Now, they carry a more somber significance. Dr. Fairchild's further research revealed that premature burial was common enough in the Victorian era to inspire safety devices for coffins. These included bells connected to the surface and ventilation tubes, marketed as insurance against being buried alive. The London-based Bateson Patent Coffin Company created elaborate systems, including bell mechanisms triggered by movement and piping to provide air for up to a week. Though expensive and often seen as eccentric, some documented cases of post-burial activation suggest the fear was real. The Herbert Prescott case directly influenced stricter medical protocols. By the 1870s, British hospitals required observation periods before burial and developed more advanced methods for confirming death. Dr. Ernest Kavanagh pioneered techniques such as monitoring condensation on mirrors over nostrils and using prolonged pressure to detect faint pulses. Though primitive by modern standards, these innovations were significant in preventing misdiagnoses and reducing premature burials. The Prescott story also raises profound questions about death and human perception. Herbert experienced a liminal state between life and death, with consciousness trapped in a body appearing dead. Modern studies of near-death experiences reference his case as an extreme example of consciousness persisting despite imperceptible signs of life. Some researchers believe Herbert maintained awareness while physically immobilized. The photograph continues to fascinate historians, doctors, artists, and philosophers, symbolizing life's fragility and the limits of human knowledge. The serene expression on Herbert's face at the boundary between life and death captures a mysterious human experience. Contemporary neuroscience research uses the Prescott case to explore consciousness during apparent clinical death. While we can't know Herbert's precise experience in the coffin, evidence suggests he remained conscious and even physically capable of trying to escape for hours. Dr. Mary Hastings, a descendant of Herbert's original physician, studied the case using modern forensic techniques. She concluded that Herbert likely remained aware for several hours after burial, struggling against confinement, until the combination of suffocation and exhaustion finally took its toll. Modern analysis adds a chilling dimension to the story, suggesting that Herbert not only woke up inside the coffin, but also held on with enough hope and determination to struggle for survival for a prolonged time. The nail marks on the coffin lid reveal a desperate fight that lasted far longer than anyone could imagine enduring. The legacy of Herbert Prescott's case goes beyond forensic medicine. His story became part of Victorian folklore, inspiring Gothic fiction and contributing to the dark, mysterious atmosphere that defined the literature of the era. Writers like Edgar Allan Poe, even before the discovery of forensic evidence, seemed to sense the terror of premature burial in works such as The Premature Burial and Berenice. When the Herbert Prescott case came to light, it confirmed that such horrors were not just literary inventions, but real tragedies that affected families. The case also influenced the development of more cautious funeral practices. Modern funeral homes now implement mandatory cooling periods and require multiple medical confirmations before burial, partly inspired by historical cases like Herbert Prescott's. Contemporary cemeteries often include memorials honoring victims of premature burial, recognizing that these medical tragedies impacted more families than official records ever documented. Herbert Prescott's grave became one of these unofficial memorials, visited by medical researchers and people interested in the macabre history of Victorian medicine. The photograph of the Prescott brothers remains a silent witness to an era when the line between life and death was far less clear than we imagine today. Each time we see the image, we confront the fact that Herbert, apparently lying in peaceful repose, was actually experiencing the final moments of a life that outlasted the detection methods available in 1858. George, standing beside his brother, could not have imagined that he was capturing one of history's most disturbing medical mysteries. His hand resting gently on Herbert's shoulder represents not only a farewell, but also a final connection between two brothers, one of whom was still quietly fighting for life. The cruel irony is that if Herbert had been able to communicate his condition during the initial medical examination, or if diagnostic methods had been more advanced, he might have survived. Instead, he became a victim of the medical limitations of his time, a tragic reminder of how scientific knowledge develops, often at the cost of human lives. Today, when we look at this historical photograph, we see not just a cultural artifact of the Victorian era, but evidence of a personal tragedy that reflects the fragility of human life and the dangers of assuming we fully understand the fundamental mysteries of existence. Herbert Prescott, in his prolonged and terrifying ordeal, inadvertently became a symbol of humanity's need to question the certainties we hold about life, death, and the states that lie between them. The story of the Prescott brothers reminds us that behind every historical record, every old photograph, and every past mystery, there are real human experiences, people who lived, suffered, and faced realities that challenge our understanding. Herbert did not choose to become a subject of medical study. He simply endured a tragedy that went beyond his era and continues to teach important lessons to future generations. This is the lasting significance of the Prescott brothers photograph. It captures not just a moment in time, but a universal truth about the limits of human knowledge and the mysteries that continue to challenge our understanding of the natural world and the human experience. If the story of the Prescott Brothers has sparked your interest in the dark corners of medical history, consider following our channel. We explore cases where the past unveils secrets that challenge how we see the world. Each new discovery is a reminder that history is full of mysteries still waiting to be unraveled.